You have to be focused, you have to be confident.
And she told me, look how fast the brain is working. And
I balance myself by just being honest.
The goal is beyond you. How do I get there?
You can try.
you can try.
Why
yeah.
not?
So they're looking at things that have gone wrong.
What do you want to do in life? That should make your heart sing.
And you can actually achieve those dreams.
This is a signal that I need to change something in my life.
Thank you so much, Miss Chansa Kapaya, for being on the show. I read a little bit about the work you do. You know, you've traveled so much and you've worked in so many different areas. And I have to say, it's so inspiring to meet a woman like you who's done so much, you know, for refugees in all these different areas. So thank you for taking your time and being on the show.
Thank you so much, Fatima, for having me.
Okay, so you know, I want to talk a little bit about refugees in Tanzania, which is what you work with mainly, right? According to Global Trends report released by the UN Refugee Agency, Tanzania hosts the third largest number of new refugees. It's at about 165,000 Burundians in Tanzania. Moreover, during the peak of the influx, and even now, 1 year later, women and children account for predominant amount of new arrivals, which is at about 77.9%. So I want to discuss a few things relating to this. How has Tanzania helped these refugees? And then what are some of the main challenges that they're facing?
Well, thank you so much, Fatima, and your viewers for the interest you've taken in refugee issues. I think it's an important subject because Tanzania really does deserve global recognition. Tanzania has been a refugee hosting country for many decades. Every time there is a sort of a disturbance in the region or even afar, Tanzania has opened her borders to refugees. So really for us, we always do not shy away from making sure that the world, everybody knows how Tanzania has been hosting refugees. On your statistics, actually, as we speak today, the Burundian refugee population is actually now 191,626. So in addition to Congolese refugees as well, we have a population of almost 265,000 refugees in the Kigoma region. Yeah, we've been getting at least about 400 new arrivals a day.
Right.
So basically when refugees arrive, together with our partners, mostly NGOs, they are provided with shelter, some basic social services, food, education for children. But we try to address the immediate needs of refugees as soon as they arrive, sort of what we call life-sustaining needs. Like I said, from food, sometimes if we have the clothing, make sure that kids are taken care of in a situation where you reduce the risks that they would face if they were not kept busy. So education for kids immediately, even in an emergency, as soon as kids arrive, we try to get kids, whether in makeshift structures, kids go to school, then you have these child-friendly centers for the really young kids, so that again, their mothers and maybe older sisters, who are usually involved in all kinds of activities from domestic chores to firewood collection, so that they can also either have the time or space to go about those chores, but at the same time give them some kind of rest, because then the children are taken care of in a conducive environment. So the immediate needs really are those life-threatening, life-saving needs, and then the rest follows as the emergency settles down.
Right, and it's quite admirable that education is one of the first things that you guys, even in spite of being refugees and being in these areas, I mean, taken out of their homes and being displaced, I think that it's good that it's such a priority.
Absolutely, because you see, I think when you engage children immediately, you also give them a sense of normalcy.
Yes.
If next time you have free time, let me know. We can organize a tour for you, admission to the camps. And you'll be amazed when you go through the classrooms. Right now, of course, the facilities aren't enough, so you find that classrooms are really overcrowded. We don't have enough classrooms. Children are learning these makeshift structures, or sometimes under the trees. And when it rains, like now it's a rainy season, then the whole class is disturbed. But you find when you go through the classroom, the children are so happy. For me, whenever I go and I visit the camps and I go to the schools, and the children are, you can hear it in their voices. You know, when a child is happy, or at least has a semblance of happiness, you can hear it in their voices. They sing and they dance for you, and that is important because you give them some kind of normalcy, stability, and then of course eventually try to get them back on track on their education.
And I think it's also fundamental because, you know, the next thing I wanted to talk about is I've done a lot of topics on mental health, you know, so this is something that ties into so many things, you know, domestic violence to, you know, violence against children, everything. And when I was reading up on refugees and the amount of post-traumatic stress they go through, you know, sleepless nights, the fact that they start getting these images of what they've gone through. And I think that it's keeping kids busy and keeping them in this normal environment sort of maybe helps with this, right?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think even for the refugee situation in Tanzania, the refugees that we see coming from Burundi, from Congo, they have actually gone through quite traumatic experiences, a lot of violence, a lot of traumatic situations. So one of the things that we do try to do, for which we actually need much more support, is the psychosocial support. Some have been victims of sexual and gender-based violence. They have been forced either to do things, traumatic things, that have left a mental scarring. So I think it's easy to talk about health and to talk about the visible, the clinics and seeing children being immunized or the sick being given medication.
Right.
But we often forget that these are people who are coming out of a war situation.
Right.
I can give you a story. I remember many years ago, I was asked by the Finnish Refugee Council to help them fundraise for a children's program when I worked in the Malawi program in the early 80s, 90s. So I went to Finland and I went to like 10 different cities, talking about the refugee program, talking about the issues of refugee kids in the Malawi program. And what happened was, because in those days, in the early years, how I think psychiatrists and others were beginning to notice how the impact of forced displacement was having on kids was through their drawings. You know, if you give a child something to draw, they will usually draw something within the environment.
Right.
So I remember going to one school, and I was talking to a group of kids about the same age as the kids that I had been dealing with in the refugee program in Malawi. So before I left, I had asked the kids to draw anything that they wanted. So they drew their pictures, and I rolled them up and I took them with me. Then when I got to Finland, this particular school, I asked the kids, first of all, they were amazed because of course they hadn't seen many African women, and they were more interested in my looks than in what I had to say. But I asked them to draw anything that they wanted. So they drew, I walked around, I watched as they drew. Of course, at that age, they were about 9, 10. So they're drawing hearts and ice cream, cars, flowers, toys, fashion. So I said, okay, put up your pictures on this side. So they put them up. So I rolled out mine and I put them on the other side. And all the kids were like this because by comparison, they saw the same age, but different environments, different circumstances. My kids had guns, burning huts, people being shot. They described everything that obviously that they have been through.
Yeah.
So that just that example will show you that it's internalized. As soon as you experience something bad, it's like when you watch a horror movie. When you
Of
go to
course.
bed, as soon as you close your eyes, the first
Yeah.
thing you see is that horror movie.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right that mental health for refugees is becoming an issue for us, and I think even as UNHCR, we're trying to pay quite a lot of attention to helping address some of the psychosocial problems that displaced persons face.
Are there any other ways that you guys have sort of helped empower these women?
The first thing that we need to understand is that, at least for UNHCR, what we've understood is that becoming a refugee affects women, girls, boys and men differently. A lot of people just look at refugees as a group without understanding the disproportionate statistics within them, disaggregated statistics within them. So the experiences that they face are sometimes very different.
Right.
And so becoming a refugee is also very different for men, boys, and women and girls. So for women and girls in particular, already as women and girls, they've already come from a background of being disadvantaged, especially in the rural sort of settings.
Yeah.
So whether through culture or tradition, sometimes religion, whatever it may be, they come already from that perspective. And so the whole prospect of becoming a refugee, where again their roles and responsibilities change, their traditional support system is changed.
Yeah.
So all these sort of impact and can contribute to various forms of discrimination against women.
Right.
But in UNHCR, we have taken the issues of women very, very carefully and very, very seriously. We prioritize the issues of women. As far back as 2001, the High Commissioner then made a commitment to refugee women to address empowerment issues and make sure that they're seated at the table with when issues concerning their personal situations are being discussed. I was in another function where I was actually a senior regional advisor on refugee women and gender.
Okay.
I was based in Nairobi at the time, and I remember taking 10 refugee women with me to Geneva. So the 5 commitments of the High Commissioner came about really from a local, regional, and headquarters level consultation. So about 50 women from all over the refugee programs all over the world came together to meet, to discuss, and tell us what are the issues that challenge them, what are the issues that concern them the most. At the end of all that process, the High Commissioner came up with 5 commitments to refugee women, one of which is meaningful participation in matters affecting their lives. And in this regard, we've advanced a little bit because we have a strategy called the Age, Gender, and Diversity Mainstreaming process. So basically what we do here is we consult, we discuss with the refugee community, and sometimes in certain situations even with their host communities, with the different groups, find out what are the risks that they face, what are the challenges that they face, and then with them identify the solutions to these problems, and then try to design our response programs in accordance with the way that the community sees this. So I think for us that is one very key form of reaching out to women and actually putting them in control, literally. Because sometimes programs are designed for them without them, and they're inappropriate. Culturally, they're not correct. Maybe you've addressed it the wrong way. You're asking them to talk in front of men or something like that, when in their culture they shouldn't, and things like that. The other one is individual registration and documentation. Again, where refugees receive documentation and registration, like in a normal sort of setting, it may discriminate them against receiving basic services because maybe you need to show your document to receive humanitarian aid, whether it be food or clothing or whatever. So to ensure that refugee women, girls also receive the documentation, and then they participate in the distribution of food. So they are part and parcel usually of the food distribution setup, because sometimes when food is distributed just to the men, then they decide how they're going to do it. They can take the whole lot and just share it or sell it, and then the family at home has nothing. So getting women involved in food distribution also ensures that the woman is also in a position of control and able to make a decision on how the food that they have will be distributed. Economic empowerment is a very, very key area for enabling refugee women and girls to become empowered, because access to resources, access to some kind of financial or income, it creates the independence, creates the ability for women to not be so vulnerable and be subjected to especially gender-based violence. So economic empowerment for sure is one of those very, very key areas that we focus on. And then preventing and responding to sexual and gender-based violence. Unfortunately, in a forced displaced situation, it happens both within the settlements or camps and externally. So being serious about addressing the risks and mitigating against them is very important to us. In fact, the UN Secretary General has declared zero tolerance on sexual and gender-based violence. So in a way, for us, that sort of forms like the basis for ensuring that women become empowered in one way. If you can address some of these issues which would limit their full participation or active participation in matters that affect them, then you can't go.
So I want to talk a little bit about the economic point of view. Often with no assets and basic skills and knowledge required to survive daily city life, how do these women and children make it through the day?
What I can say is access to education is first and foremost important. Why I'm starting with education again, education not just in the literacy sense, but then again you understand that if you can get refugee women and girls to be literate, of course they're going to do much better in supporting themselves. So access to not just formal education but literacy as well, ensuring that women and girls have access to this is important. But at the same time, refugee women and girls are involved in a variety of technical skills, some of which even happens in their homes, so they don't have to go very far. They are involved in cooking, food that they sell, tailoring. We've bought baskets, beautiful artistic type of stuff that refugee women make, beads, baskets, clothing. So in a way, when as soon as they settle down, they start to find the inroads into the local economy. Sometimes food. Sometimes they're also involved in working formally, in a way, through the NGO agencies that work in the camps. Some of them work in the clinics and the schools, although it's not paid work as such because they're paid like an incentive allowance, but they often can get access to these kinds of opportunities as well.
So what is the economic impact of having refugees for the country, for example, like Tanzania?
In many situations, and Tanzania included, people look at refugees like a burden. That these people have come, they're taking away our land, they're taking away this and that. Part of receiving and accommodating refugees is an international responsibility, a shared responsibility of states who are signatories to the various international conventions, but it's also a human rights issue. The more progressive way of looking at hosting refugees is that refugees are not a burden, but they can be an economic resource for the country. They can contribute to the development of a country. Refugees don't come. You remember you were commenting on a poster in my office that you didn't know Einstein was a refugee. Refugees also come with skills. Refugees also come with knowledge, information, and if those skills that they have are put to use, they can contribute
course.
to a local economy. We just recently came back from Uganda with the Tanzanian government. The government here wanted to see how the Uganda government is hosting refugees. By the way, they have now about 1 million refugees from South Sudan, Burundi, and Congo, and many others.
Yeah.
And they've turned refugees into a sort of a resource. And I believe that even here in Tanzania we can do the same.
Yeah.
And we did it before here in Tanzania.
Yeah.
Before, when refugees were living in the settlements.
Right.
You recall a couple of years back, the government of Tanzania made this very, very heroic and unprecedented decision to naturalize those Burundians that had come in the 70s.
Yeah.
So in those days, they used to live in settlements, not in camps, and they were given land. And in fact, the area, Katavi, Tabora region, almost became like a breadbasket, because once you give these people land, but the Burundians are quite hardworking, they were growing a lot of food.
Yeah.
That was either going within the local economy, sometimes even outside to the region.
Right.
And so this is again one way in which refugees can contribute, especially in situations where they're given access to farming land or land to grow food, like they were in the 70s here in Tanzania, and which we found also in Uganda, where we drove for miles. You saw these farms, maize and vegetables and stuff like that. But coming closer to home here, because in the camps they don't have access to a lot of land, but they somehow they find means and ways, and so we have, through our partners, created common markets. There's a lot of trade that is going on, so there's a lot of money that goes back into the local economy. Also, one important economic advantage in Tanzania is the work that is going on through what we call the connectivity project. Okay. Basically, what has happened is that in Tanzania, some of the mobile phone providers, Airtel, Vodacom, Tigo, they've put up all these masts near the camps, which are serving both the local community and the refugees. So mobile money has become a big thing.
Yeah.
You have refugees and host communities who are mobile money vendors.
Right.
So they're collaborating with Unhcr in providing access to internet to refugees in the camps. But the whole mobile phone is big money. I mean, from the talk time to internet, all that. So you have Tigo, Vodacom, Airtel. Airtel has now partnered with World Food Program, because instead of distributing food, what's going to happen is that refugees will get cash, but not liquid, but through Airtel, through this tap something system, something like mobile money. So you go to a particular vendor around those areas and you say, I want to buy some water, and instead of exchanging cash, you tap and the vendor gets his money and you get your commodity.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Exactly. And so they're starting off with about 10,000 people, but eventually it will be rolled out to the whole 200,000 people. We are also getting into cash. I think cash-based assistance is becoming the preferred way of providing assistance to refugees rather than material. So for commodities, it could be for sleeping mats, it could be for water buckets, it could be for cooking pots. So all that would tap into the local economy because you are buying locally. And in terms of buying locally, we also try very hard to buy from local suppliers when we want to procure, especially domestic utensils and things like that for distribution to the refugees. So easily, the colleagues that are dealing with supply issues tell me that almost like over 500 Tanzanian companies have registered on what they call the UN Global Marketplace. So they can compete for procurement of relief items. So I've just given you a few examples of how, even in Tanzania, just by having refugees there, you can actually inject into the local economy.
And so my next question is, because we did talk a little bit about the host country and the refugees, and how do they integrate within the country, and what are some of the problems that the economic side is one of it, but in terms of social issues, what are some of them that they face?
You know, in a lot of instances, especially for those refugees that are coming from nearby where they share borders, you'll find that the boundaries between the countries is kind of artificially drawn by the colonialists, if I can put it this way. A lot of times you'll find that there's a lot of cultural similarities and affinities between the two populations. Sometimes they've got similar cultures, sometimes they've got similar languages. And this is not just here in Tanzania, by the way. You mentioned I've been working with UNHCR now for the last 28 years. So I've seen this happen. Yes, even in my own country, Zambia, you'll find when we received the Mozambicans for the first time, on that side they speak similar languages with the local people. So on the one hand, you find that there are cultural and similarities in languages, especially when the population is coming from adjacent to the border areas. But it becomes more challenging when you have refugees maybe from a little bit afar. Language becomes a problem. So trying to get them to understand the local languages is one way to help them to integrate. The other is not to isolate the refugees, but rather to create a situation where there are some activities where refugees and the local population have together. It could be through education, it could be through sport, it could be through even the common market we just spoke about.
A little bit about just your personal experiences and things like that. So, as a woman, what drove you to take interest, or what drove you to work at the UNHCR?
What drove me? When we were early speaking, I told you it was all quite by accident that I got involved with UNHCR. By profession, I'm a sociologist, and so I got involved in doing some research for UNHCR then in Zambia. They were looking to work with UNHCR in Zambia with the Mozambican refugees. So I got involved in some work to try to understand the Mozambican refugee problem at the time. And then UNHCR wanted to set up a settlement for refugees in Zambia. So I got involved in that. I got hired. I had just finished my master's. And I got involved, and I worked for this NGO, Save the Children, for 2 years. And then after that, again, as I said, I wasn't looking. UNHCR asked me, don't you want a job with UNHCR in Malawi? I said, me? No, I like to be in my country, but no. On a serious note, I did. It was quite coincidental, but I don't regret it, because I think for me, what is fulfilling about the work with UNHCR is that you do have a sense of accomplishment in a way, because you feel that you've helped, you've done something to alleviate another person's suffering. So I've been with UNHCR since 1988. I haven't changed organizations. Sometimes, yes, it does get a little bit tough, and there are times when you're like, maybe I should do something different. But it has its advantages. Most of it is really the feeling of wanting to help, the feeling of seeing a change in the lives of others, the impact that is made when you've done something and you've brought a smile to people's faces. For me, the people that I love most in the camps when I go to visit refugee settlements are the children. They're the ones that really...
Innocence, right?
Yeah, I like to spend time with the kids, and just to hear them laughing, it makes me happy when I see that.
Have you met any refugee women, or would you like to share a story of any kind of a woman or a refugee girl, or whoever you've met who has touched you in some way or another?
It's not. I wish I could just name one, but to be honest, I can't name one specific. But I can just say the majority of the refugee women and girls, because we shouldn't forget the girls,
Yeah.
that I've met, all of them have struck me in one way or the other.
Yeah.
Because as a woman, in an ordinary setting, and for me, I'm the firstborn in my family, you have a lot of responsibilities, a lot of weight that is placed on your shoulders as a girl child in any situation. And then when you meet these women that are so resilient, that have so much strength, and they have so much courage to face the challenges that they face, I'm not quite sure how they do it, but they do it.
Yeah.
Their whole lives are turned upside down. The life that they know is turned upside down. In many cases, husbands, fathers, brothers, their support structures are taken away.
Yeah.
And they often come initially maybe even on their own with the kids to a foreign country. They have to find a way to survive. They have to find a way to keep the children together, look out for their kids, but they do it. And so when I see the strength that they have, the resilience that they have, the courage that they have, really I'm awed, and I cannot but admire all the refugee women and girls in the world, because they carry so much of the burden of being refugees. When they get to their countries of asylum, they have to quickly try to put together the family, make sure everybody is happy, and forget maybe about themselves.
Yeah.
So for me, my tribute is to all refugee women and girls, wherever they are, whether it be in Tanzania, whether it be in Syria, whether it be in Afghanistan, wherever they are. I think really we need to give a special recognition to refugee women and girls, because the burden that they carry, the responsibilities that they must face are enormous. Absolutely enormous.
Are they usually separated, or is it possible that a lot of refugee families are separated?
There's a lot of separation, including with children. So because usually the separation comes in the movement phase. So in most cases, the women and children come first. And then the men come later, because they usually stay behind. They want to secure their property, or maybe they were farmers or something like that, and they want to harvest the little bit that was left, or hang around because they maybe think, oh, the war's going to end tomorrow, so why should I go? So sometimes separation happens like that, but in many cases, when the family follows, they find one another. We have a lot of unaccompanied children or minors, even here in the camps in Tanzania. And these are children either who have been left orphaned, or sometimes they just don't know where their parents went, and so they're taken care of by foster families within the community. So separation is a big issue, and sometimes the separation is not within the same country, because when a disturbance happens, people run in different directions. So you find that perhaps they will hear that my husband and children are in Tanzania, but my sister is in Uganda, my aunt is in Kenya.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we go through partners like the Red Cross. The Red Cross help in family tracing and identification.
Okay.
They find through the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, they do some tracing work to try to reunite families.
I think everyone reads about this in the news, but then today when I spoke to you, I think that it touched me a lot more, and I really hope it touches the people who are watching this, because, you know, when you look from the outside, things don't really affect you as much, you know. But when the things I heard today, and I think I'll start watching the news with a different perspective, you know, and sort of with a lot more feeling and emotion now, because I feel like I know a lot more. So, you know, what are some of the needs at the refugee camps, and how can we help as just human beings?
How can we help as human beings? That's the best place to start. empathy is one thing, at least just to have that open mind that you have, and I'm sure, Fatima, that it wasn't because of this program, but you seem to me to be already a very passionate young woman with a big heart. And a lot of it is empathy because organizations like Unhcr depend on voluntary contributions. We don't have a regular budget. We have a small one but for all our operations worldwide, we depend on donations, big and small, governments, companies, private sector, whatever. So when there is an openness, an open mind, then people look at the refugee problem in a different way, in an empathetic way. And so that's one thing. But in terms of needs, I mean, the needs are so vast. I mean, we could go into all the nitty-gritties. But there are some areas that are desperately vital. For example, prevention of gender-based violence is one of the key areas that we work in the camps in Tanzania. And so even just the provision of, for example, solar lighting in the camps is enough, because when women and girls are trying to access toilets and they're dark or in the camp, so simple things like that make a huge difference. Yeah. Scholastic materials for kids. I talked a lot about children, even from the onset of an emergency. Yeah. As soon as they put their bags down, we try to organize some kind of schooling for the kids. It's important, just for like any other child, even in a normal situation. Yeah. That creates a kind of a normalcy. But provision of scholastic materials for the kids, from books to writing materials, and maybe even toys and stuff like that for the younger kids is good enough. Access to financial, financial resources through small business activities is also, so rather than just focus on like humanitarian, like food, but even things like that would go a long way to create the environment that would enable refugees to become self-sufficient and self-reliant. Access to literacy programs for all refugees, but I'm going to, because we're talking about women and children especially, I would say literacy programs for women are important, because again, we've spoken about when a woman can read and write, you educate a woman, they say you empower the whole village. So
I feel like you're like all the lines I use, because I generally do, I use these lines. I say when you educate a man, you educate a person. You educate a woman.
Exactly.
And it's so true.
Yeah. So those are some of the areas that I would really look into. I mean, there's a whole list of things that that are lacking, where donations would be welcome. But let's look at substantively how to make qualitative difference in the lives of refugees. It's not just about food. Food is important. Yeah. Clothing is important.
and I will be truthful, when I came in and I do watch the news, and I do research on these things, especially now with the whole outrage of the Syria thing. And I guess that's because it's in the media a lot. But today, about Tanzania, I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't know the extent to which, how many refugees we have. And I think that we can all play a small part, in making a difference. And like you said, it doesn't have to be just food, it can be the little things that help. So honestly, thank you so much, for being on the show. It's really nice to meet women like you, empowered women who, just speaking to you, I feel like I've learned so much, and I really hope that through this show and through the knowledge that you've given us, that people will be more aware, and even if they can't contribute materially, if they can empathize a little bit more, I think that it would be substantial.
You have to be focused, you have to be confident,
And she told me, look how fast the brain is working. And
I balance myself by just being honest.
The goal is beyond you. How do I get there?
You can try.
Why
yeah.
not?
So they're looking at things that have gone wrong.
What do you want to do in life? That should make your heart
And
sing.
you can actually achieve those dreams.
This is a signal that I need to change something in my life.